Hui had never set foot in Gò Vấp before deciding to rent a room there. A provincial college student from Trà Vinh, he needed an affordable place while finishing his final internship in Ho Chi Minh City. Rising rents in central districts forced him to sprawl outward, searching for cheap accommodations. Online, he found a peculiar listing: room for rent, cheap, near the main road, includes partial furnishings. The minimal price snagged his attention. Dragging a battered suitcase, Hui arrived one humid afternoon at a narrow alley off Phan Van Tri Street in Gò Vấp. The alley was packed with small shops, roadside food stalls, and motorbikes jammed like fish in a can. He spotted a chipped sign reading "Knock Lawn Lodging." The building was worn, paint flaking in patches. A single neon bulb flickered above the entrance. Hui hesitated but recalled how little money he had. He stepped inside to find a cramped reception area. A middle-aged woman, Ms. Bitch, introduced herself as the landlady. She offered a curt nod and led him upstairs to see the available room. Along the way, stale air wafted through the corridor, and some overhead lights sputtered. Room 202 was a rectangular space with scuffed tiles, a single window facing a concrete wall, and a small attached bathroom. It had an old fan, a scratch table, and a bunk bed that looked ready to collapse under a strong sneeze. Yet Hui, short on funds, accepted. He planned to share it with a cousin, Tuan, arriving soon from Kintho, along with their mutual friend, Lon, from the same university. The rent was unbelievably cheap, less than half the going rate in Gò Vấp. Ms. Bitch said the discount was because the building is old. Hui didn't overthink it. Better to endure a bit of discomfort than to be homeless, he mused, signing the contract. Little did he know how dire the discomfort would become. 2 days later, Tuan and Lon arrived, each hauling a duffel bag. They marveled at the low rent, grateful to split costs. But their first impressions echoed Hui's. The building's corridors smelled faintly of sewage, some corners caked with mildew. In the evenings, light from the alley cast ominous shadows on the second-floor walkway. Ms. Bitch gave them spare keys, warning they mustn't lose them or risk a fine. She vanished soon after, leaving them to settle. The trio arranged their meager belongings. Lon set up a small corner for her laptop and study materials, while Tuan claimed the lower bunk, and Hui took the top. They pinned up a few photos to enliven the drab walls. At dusk, they explored the neighborhood, discovering cheap street foods, a small grocery kiosk, and a bustling market. Gò Vap's chaotic energy excited them. By 9 p.m., they returned to room 202, chatting about their internship schedules. The building fell silent, with occasional footsteps in the corridor. They turned in early, fatigued from the day. Near midnight, Hui woke abruptly. He sensed movement in the dark. At first, he assumed it was Tuan shifting below or Lon rummaging. But as he lay there, he heard a faint tap-tap at the door. Heart beating faster, he waited for someone to respond. Then a second, more deliberate knock. Confused, he checked the time, 12:17 a.m. Another knock. Lon stirred, muttering, "Who's that?" Tuan, half asleep, mumbled curses. Hui climbed down, flipping on the room's single overhead light. He inched to the door, opened it a crack, empty corridor. He peered left and right. No occupant, no sign of footsteps. Feeling uneasy, he locked up again, telling the others no one was outside. Lon shrugged, returning to bed. They dismissed it as a wandering neighbor or a random mishap. The night proceeded without further interruption, yet Hui's gut churned. Over the next few days, each occupant had small, unsettling experiences. One morning, Lon found the table forcibly moved away from the wall. Another time, Tuan discovered odd damp footprints in the bathroom, though no one had showered recently. Hui sometimes caught a whiff of rotting odor that vanished without trace. They swapped stories, half laughing to lighten tension. "Maybe we have a ghost roommate," Lon joked nervously. But the tension was real. The building itself was strangely deserted, few neighbors, and those around seemed aloof. Ms. Bitch seldom appeared. The trio became warily watchful. One afternoon, Hui ran into an older man, Mr. Tri, who lived in room 205. Mr. Tri cryptically asked, "Which room are you in?" When Hui replied 202, the man frowned. "Be careful. People don't stay in that room for long," he whispered, darting away. Alarmed, Hui pressed for details, but the man refused to elaborate, shaking his head grimly. At dinner, Hui told Tuan and Lon about the encounter. They speculated the room might have a cursed reputation. Lon suggested they check Ms. Bitch or other tenants for the building's history. But no one was forthcoming. They resolved to ignore rumors and soldier on, focusing on their budgets. After all, how bad can it get? They reasoned. Yet each night, the corridor's gloom frayed their nerves a bit more. Within a week, the unexplained knocks escalated. Usually around midnight, the door rattled with slow, deliberate knocks. Knock. 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 Followed by silence. If they mustered the nerve to fling the door open, no one was outside. The corridor light flickered, revealing emptiness. Eventually, the knocks came multiple times a night, robbing them of sleep. Lon, exhausted from repeated disturbances, lost patience. One evening after the first knock, she leaped to the door and yanked it wide, shouting, "Stop it or we'll call the police." The corridor was, as always, deserted. The only reply was the echo of her own voice. Furious, she slammed the door. But the faint sense of a presence lingered, as though intangible eyes observed them from the shadows. The three tenants began staying up later, keeping their overhead light on, half expecting the knocks. But ignoring them proved impossible. Anxiety overshadowed their daily routines. Lan's internship performance suffered. Hui found it hard to concentrate on coding tasks, and Tuan grew jumpy, cursing at random creaks in the building. One evening, around 2 a.m., the knocks came again. This time, the door handle jiggled as if someone tried to twist it open. Cold terror clenched Hui's spine. He pointed to the handle, watching it rattle slightly. "This is insane," Tuan hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. Lon stood back, hugging herself, eyes wide. Then, as quickly as it started, the handle stilled. A hush spread. They braced for more, but none came. The rest of the night passed in hollow dread. The next morning, a timid knock at their door startled them. It was Mr. Try again, but this time, he looked contrite. He stepped inside warily, glancing over his shoulder, and whispered, "I hear you've been getting midnight knocks?" They confirmed it, describing the persistent harassment. Mr. Try sighed, admitting he knew of a past occupant in room 202, a young woman Knock, who studied at a nearby college. She died unexpectedly in that room. Rumor said she hung herself after heartbreak or family issues. Some said Ms. Bitch tried to conceal the tragedy to avoid scaring off future tenants. Several who rented 202 after her either fled mid-lease or fell ill, Mr. Try recounted. They heard knocks or saw shadows at night. The building's old, and Ms. Bitch just wants profit. She never warns new tenants. He refused to say more, but urged them to be cautious. Shaken, the trio realized this wasn't a mere rumor. Could Knock's restless spirit be behind the nightly intrusions? If so, what did she want? A resolution? Or was it malevolent? They weighed the possibility of moving, but finances were tight. Hui proposed a small offering, like a fruit plate or incense, to appease the spirit. Perhaps acknowledging her might calm the disturbance. That evening, they set a saucer of fruit with a single lit incense stick near the door, murmuring a soft prayer for Knock's soul. For the first time in nights, no knocks came. They tentatively exhaled relief. Maybe the spirit accepted the gesture. But the respite was brief. 2 nights later, the knocks resumed, more forceful than before, accompanied by a faint female moan. The door handle rattled violently at 1 a.m., jolting them from restless half-sleep. Lon screamed, huddling in the corner. Hui and Tuan rushed to brace the door, hearts pounding. Something hammered the wood in heavy, unearthly blows. When they shouted for it to stop, the banging intensified, shaking the flimsy door. A disembodied wail seeped through the gap, echoing in the corridor. Panic surged. Then, in a final crash, the handle snapped back, and silence fell. Tuan unlocked the door moments later, flinging it open, expecting to see a mania-laced intruder, but found only the deserted corridor, faint light from a flickering bulb. After that harrowing event, the trio no longer felt safe. They confronted Ms. Bitch, demanding answers. She gave them stony silence, refusing to confirm the story of Knock's suicide. Furious, they threatened to break lease if no resolution was found. Ms. Bitch cornered, half-admitted yes. Something tragic happened in that room. But the building's old, things happen. She insisted they remain or lose their deposit. The men and Lon left, fuming, feeling trapped. Oddly, the spirit's presence wasn't confined to nights. Lon started noticing door knocks at midday while alone in the room. She'd opened to find no one. Once, returning from campus, she found her textbooks scattered on the floor, although she left them neatly stacked. A watery footprint trailed from the bathroom to the closet, then vanished. She took pictures as proof, showing them to Hui and Tuan, who were equally alarmed. One Sunday morning, Tuan saw the corridor overhead light flicker before going out. In the dim gloom, he glimpsed a pale shape flit past the corner, a suggestion of long hair swaying. He chased after it, but it disappeared into the locked storage room at the corridor's end. The storage door was chained shut, supposedly unused. Shaken, he retreated to room 202, breath ragged. The haunting escalated beyond simple knocks. The trio considered calling a local spiritual medium or Thay Kung. A few of Hui's friends recommended a small temple in Gò Vấp, known for dealing with restless spirits. They toyed with the idea but worried about the cost. Meanwhile, Ms. Bitch insisted any exorcism must be at the tenant's expense, refusing to help. Tensions soared. The spirit's activity turned bolder, the atmosphere in the room choking with fear. Matters culminated on a stormy night. A heavy rain battered the alley, wind howling around the building. By 10 p.m., the power flickered off citywide. The corridor was plunged into darkness, aside from occasional lightning flashes. Hui, Lon, and Tuan lit a single candle in room 202, uneasy about the ghost's likely emergence. Around midnight, an explosive thud pounded the door, followed by splintering knocks. The candle guttered, half dying. Lon clutched Hui's arm, trembling. Tuan grabbed a small metal rod, though he doubted it could repel a spirit. They braced for another violent intrusion. Suddenly, the door flew open with a crack, the lock forcibly undone. Shock seized them. In the corridor's gloom stood a female figure, long hair drenched from the storm, body half illuminated by lightning through a small window. Her eyes, if visible, were drowned in darkness. A guttural moan escaped her lips, echoing in the enclosed space. In a swirl of intangible force, the figure glided into the room. Lon shrieked, stumbling backward. The spirit's face contorted with sorrow or anger, mouth parted as though wailing silently. The overhead thunder roared, accentuating the horror. Tuan lunged, brandishing his metal rod in vain. The spirit flicked a pale arm, and Tuan was hurled against the wall, letting out a pained cry. The candle flame snuffed, leaving the room in near total darkness. Hui's phone flashlight provided a feeble beam, revealing glimpses of the specter's hair swaying. Lon cowered on the bunk, tears streaming. "Please, we did nothing to you," she stammered. The ghost hissed, drifting closer. A wave of ice-cold air washed over them. Hui, frantic, clutched Lan's hand, whispering apologies and pleas for peace. In a final surge, the figure let out a keening wail that rattled the windows. Then she receded from sight, dissolving into an eddy of shadows near the bathroom door. Silence crashed down, leaving the trio quaking in terror, bruised from the encounter. No illusions remained. They faced a lethal haunting. At dawn, battered from the spirit's assault, they made a unanimous decision. They couldn't stay another night. But finances constrained them. Meanwhile, Ms. Bitch refused to refund deposits or waive fees. Furious, they threatened to speak publicly about the building's haunting. She, perhaps fearing legal trouble, reluctantly agreed to let a local medium attempt to cleanse the place. That afternoon, the trio contacted Master Kim, a reputed spiritual practitioner recommended by a friend. A stoic older woman, Master Kim arrived with an assistant, carrying a bag of incense, talismans, and a small bronze bowl. She listened quietly to their tale of nightly knocks and the violent manifestation. Her face grew grim. "This is a tormented soul," she said. "She must be guided to peace, or forced out if needed." They arranged the ritual for that very night. The idea frightened them, but they preferred a confrontation with a professional at hand rather than further random attacks. Master Kim insisted they gather in the corridor outside room 202, near midnight, with doors open. The caretaker, Ms. Bitch, nervously gave permission, too spooked to object. At 11:30 p.m., Master Kim set a low table with candles, bowls of salt water, and a single mirror. She placed fruit and a joss paper effigy symbolizing the occupant's lost life. The trio hovered anxiously, hearts thumping. Ms. Bitch lingered by the stairwell, trembling. Rain threatened again outside, the thunderheads thickening. Close to midnight, Master Kim began chanting in a low, measured tone, summoning benevolent spirits to stand witness, beckoning the restless ghost to appear. The corridor air turned cold. Candle flames wavered. A distant hush settled over the building, as though everything paused in anticipation. Hui, Lon, and Tuan formed a semicircle behind the medium. Ms. Bitch stood further away, half hidden by the corner. The chanting escalated, layering in an arcane melody. Suddenly, a flick of neon from the alley's reflection caught the corridor's end. A shape emerged, a woman's silhouette, hair draping over her face. She drifted forward, each step silent but purposeful. Lon gasped, nearly dropping her phone flashlight. The spirit halted a few paces from the table, wavering between tangible and translucent. A sorrowful moan rumbled from her throat. Master Kim lifted a talisman, reciting, "We call you forth to find rest. Let go of anger, be free from this place." The spirit's hair parted slightly, revealing a contorted visage with black emptiness where eyes should be. She hissed, the sound resonating with a mix of heartbreak and fury. The ghost advanced in staccato motions, reaching for room 202's door. Master Kim flung salt water from the bowl, which sizzled in the air. The entity recoiled, letting out a shrill wail. Then, with unnatural speed, she lunged at Tuan, who was nearest. He stumbled, yelping. Hui and Lon yanked him back. Master Kim pressed the talisman to the ghost's intangible form. The spirit shrieked, arms flailing, the corridor lights blinking wildly. Candles all but snuffed out, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. Master Kim began a final incantation, voice rising above the wail. The ghost convulsed, as if hammered by invisible blows. The overhead bulb flickered, threatening to go dark. Ms. Bitch let out a sob at the stairwell. Finally, the spirit gave a piercing cry, contorting violently. She cast one last look at the door of room 202, an expression of anguish etched on her half their face. Then she dissolved into swirling darkness, evaporating into the corridor's stale air. In the hush that followed, only the drip of candle wax and the ragged breathing of the group remained. Master Kim declared the spirit banished. She was tethered by despair, she said softly, eyes pitying. I hope she now finds release. The trio collapsed in relief, tears streaking their cheeks. Ms. Bitch, trembling, apologized for her secrecy, promising partial refunds if they chose to move out. Indeed, the next morning, the trio hastily packed. The haunting might have ended, but none wanted to linger. They parted ways with Ms. Bitch on shaky terms, relieved to leave the building's gloom behind. Freed from the deposit trap, they pooled resources to find a modest but safe apartment closer to their campus. The following weeks, they each carried a residue of fear, jumping at midnight knocks, dreaming of pale silhouettes. Over time, the nightmares faded, overshadowed by daily life. Hui busied himself with internship duties, Lon focused on final exams, Tuan joined a part-time job to rebuild finances. They seldom mentioned the events at Nak Lon Lodging unless among themselves, recalling the dread with shaky laughter. Still, a part of them never fully recovered. They'd read horror stories before, thinking them exaggerated or fictional. Now they knew the raw terror of intangible knocks in the night, the stench of a restless soul. They learned that no cheap rent was worth enduring a vengeful ghost's presence. A month after leaving, Hui revisited Gò Vấp for errands, passing near the old alley. Curiosity drove him to see if the building still stood. Indeed, Nak Lon Lodging remained, sign askew. Ms. Bitch was nowhere in sight, replaced by a for rent, renovation soon sign. Perhaps a new owner planned a thorough reconstruction. Hui paused outside, scanning the cracked facade. In his mind's eye, he saw that corridor's flickering light, heard the phantom knocks. He could almost feel the chill on his neck. A pang of sadness surfaced, recalling the woman who presumably died in that room. If the ritual truly freed her, maybe the building wouldn't see future victims. He left the alley, exhaling. The city's roar swallowed him. Life moved on, yet he remained changed by that harrowing chapter. Late at night, he sometimes woke to recall the distant pounding at the door, the intangible presence. But comforted by the knowledge that he, Lon, and Tuan survived, forging unbreakable bonds through adversity. For future tenants faced with suspiciously cheap rooms in old decaying buildings, the trio had only one piece of advice: Always ask why the rent is so low, and if nightly knocks echo in your dreams, pack your bags before it's too late.